When you're a billionaire, you think you can control every detail of life, down to who teaches your child the perfect Parisian accent. That was certainly true for Victoria Leclerc, a powerhouse CEO known for running international boardrooms with icy precision. But her world tilted the day her 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, walked into the living room with a stubborn grin and said, "I've picked my French teacher, Mom. And I'm not changing my mind." Victoria assumed Sophie had chosen one of the polished, high-priced tutors her assistant had screened. But instead, Sophie pointed across the courtyard of their Manhattan penthouse complex, to a man unpacking a box of battered books, with a little girl clinging to his leg. That man was Daniel Carter. Daniel wasn't on any list. He was a 38-year-old single dad, a former army linguist who had taught French to fellow soldiers during overseas missions. He'd been medically discharged after an injury and was now working 2 part-time jobs while raising his 8-year-old daughter, Emily. From the start, Victoria didn't get it. A billionaire's daughter learning French from a man who sometimes wore worn-out sneakers and second-hand coats? Not exactly the image she had in mind. But Sophie's insistence was relentless, and against her better judgment, Victoria agreed to one trial lesson. The first lesson. Sophie showed up to Daniel's tiny, book-filled apartment, walls lined with dictionaries, travel maps, and little paper cranes his daughter had folded. Instead of starting with formal grammar, Daniel handed Sophie a mug of cocoa and taught her a French song his own mother had sung to him as a child. Emily sat beside them, shy but smiling, and the three of them laughed over Sophie's comically exaggerated pronunciations. When Sophie came home that night, she said something that caught Victoria completely off guard. "He doesn't make me feel like I'm learning for a grade. He makes me feel like I'm learning for me." The weeks that followed. One lesson turned into 2. 2 turned into a month. Victoria began noticing changes. Sophie was more confident, curious, even kinder. She'd tell stories about Emily's love for astronomy, or how Daniel sometimes skipped dinner so his daughter could have seconds. Victoria, who had grown up in wealth, had never truly seen what financial struggle looked like up close. Until one rainy night, when she went to drop off Sophie's forgotten notebook and saw Daniel in the kitchen, quietly eating a piece of toast while Emily had a bowl of soup. The twist. 2 months in, Victoria invited Daniel to a charity gala. He refused at first, said it wasn't his world, but eventually agreed. That night, while surrounded by the city's elite, Victoria watched him slip away from the crowd. To kneel beside the catering staff, chatting in flawless French with one of the servers who looked overwhelmed. It hit her then, Daniel wasn't just teaching Sophie French. He was teaching her compassion, humility, and respect, lessons Victoria herself had never mastered in her decades of boardroom victories. The climax. Everything changed on Emily's 9th birthday. Sophie had been saving her allowance for weeks. She dragged her mother to a bookstore and insisted they buy a brand new French-English dictionary for Emily, so she and her dad can study together. When Emily opened the gift, she hugged Sophie tight and whispered, "This is the first new book I've ever owned." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He tried to thank Victoria, but she realized the truth, she had done nothing. Sophie had learned this generosity from him. The uplifting conclusion. By the end of the school year, Sophie was conversational in French, but that wasn't the real victory. She had learned the value of empathy, of seeing the worth in someone's heart before judging their circumstances. Victoria ended up hiring Daniel full-time, not just as a tutor, but as head of a new educational outreach program her company funded for underprivileged kids. His paycheck more than doubled, and Emily's face lit up when she learned they could finally move into a bigger place with a bedroom of her own. And one quiet Sunday morning, as Victoria watched Sophie and Emily reading together in the park, she realized something she'd never expected. Her daughter had chosen the right teacher, not for the French, but for the humanity. Victoria didn't just see the change in Sophie, she felt it. Their conversations at dinner had shifted from grades and upcoming tests to kindness and stories about people Sophie met through Daniel. She'd talk about Emily's dream of seeing the Eiffel Tower, and how Daniel once told her that speaking another language was like having a key to someone else's heart. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie invited Emily over for a playdate. Victoria, expecting giggles and board games, walked into the living room to find the girls sitting on the floor, drawing pictures of Paris. Emily's version had the Eiffel Tower surrounded by fireworks. Sophie's had two little stick figures holding hands in front of it. When Victoria asked about it, Sophie smiled. "That's me and Emily, when we visit one day." Victoria's chest tightened. She had the money to make that dream happen without a second thought, but she realized this wasn't about her swooping in like some fairy godmother. This was about learning what mattered, letting bonds grow naturally. The trip came sooner than anyone expected. A business conference took Victoria to Paris that summer, and without telling the girls, she booked 2 extra tickets. When she revealed the surprise, Emily covered her mouth in shock, tears welling in her eyes. Daniel tried to protest, mumbling something about not accepting charity, but Victoria stopped him. "This isn't charity," she said softly. "This is gratitude." Paris wasn't just a trip, it was a turning point. On their first night, they sat outside a little café on Rue Claire. Sophie and Emily practiced ordering in French while Daniel translated the jokes of the waiter, and Victoria realized she hadn't seen her daughter laugh so freely in years. Under the warm glow of the street lamps, it struck her, this single dad, who had once been just the man across the courtyard, had given her daughter more than any amount of wealth ever could. And in return, her daughter had given him something just as valuable, a reminder that even the smallest connections can change the course of a life. When they returned home, Victoria didn't just keep Daniel in their lives, she made sure his influence reached hundreds more. And whenever someone asked Sophie how she spoke French so well, she'd grin and say, "Because I learned from the best." And she didn't mean the best in grammar or pronunciation. She meant the best in heart. Months passed, and the small circle they had built only grew stronger. Daniel's outreach program flourished. Kids from neighborhoods that had been overlooked for years were now sitting in bright classrooms, learning not just French, but Spanish, Italian, even sign language. Victoria watched him work with them, patient and warm, and realized he had the rare ability to make every child feel seen. Sophie often tagged along to help, bringing Emily with her. The two girls became inseparable, their friendship a constant reminder of how this unlikely story had started. Sometimes, Victoria would catch them teaching each other silly phrases in French, collapsing into fits of laughter when they got the pronunciation wrong. One evening, after an especially long board meeting, Victoria stopped by Daniel's office. She found him sitting at his desk, going through a stack of letters, thank you notes from students and parents. His hand paused over one written in shaky French by a boy who had once struggled to speak at all. "He wrote this himself," Daniel said quietly. 3 months ago, he barely said a word in class. Now he's telling me about his dream of becoming a translator. Victoria felt something shift inside her again. All the money she'd ever made couldn't buy the kind of hope she was seeing in these letters. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of city lights, she thought back to the moment Sophie had first pointed across the courtyard. She had almost said no. She had almost let appearances decide everything. But she hadn't. And because of that, countless lives, including her own, had changed. At dinner that week, Sophie asked if Emily and Daniel could join them for Thanksgiving. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. And when the holiday came, they sat around the same table, billionaire, veteran, 2 giggling girls, and a feast that seemed to taste better simply because it was shared. Victoria looked at them all and realized something she hadn't known when this began. Sometimes, the richest moments in life have nothing to do with money at all.